The Queen is dead, but the story you were told is a lie. While the world watched the carefully orchestrated grief of a nation, behind the stone walls of Balmoral Castle, a desperate race against time was unfolding. One that involved a 48-hour media blackout, a missing physician, and a secret golden box that allegedly changed the line of succession forever. Why did BBC anchors change into black ties hours before the official announcement? Why was Prince Harry reportedly prevented from seeing his grandmother one last time? And what exactly was written in the final letter the Queen signed with a trembling hand just moments before her heart stopped? Tonight, we're pulling back the velvet curtain on one of the most protected institutions on Earth. Months have been spent cross-referencing flight logs, leaked medical memos, and eyewitness accounts from palace insiders to uncover a version of events the mainstream media was accused of avoiding. From the mysterious purple folder found on her bedside table to the real reason King Charles appeared visibly shaken in his first photograph as monarch, this narrative claims to reveal 15 dark secrets that were never meant to leave the Scottish Highlands. The official account states that Queen Elizabeth II passed away peacefully due to old age. However, alternative claims suggest a far more turbulent, and perhaps even calculated, end. There are whispers of a hidden medical condition that could have shaken the monarchy to its core, and even speculation about a secret pact made between the Queen and a disgraced family member in her final hours. As we peel back the layers of this 70-year reign's final chapter, one thing becomes clear. The mourning period may not have been just about respect, it may also have been about control and containment. Stay with me until the very end of this investigation, because the 15th and final secret, regarding the last will and testament, is described as so explosive that it could, in theory, challenge the structure of the Commonwealth as we know it. You cannot afford to miss a single moment of this timeline. Because once you begin to see the patterns, you may never look at the royal family the same way again. If you're ready to go beyond the headlines and explore what really happened when the lights went out at Balmoral, make sure to subscribe, because this story is just beginning to unfold. To understand the end, we need to examine the 48 hours that some believe the palace attempted to quietly erase from public focus. On September 6, 2022, Queen Elizabeth II carried out her final constitutional duty, appointing Liz Truss as Prime Minister. The photograph released to the public showed a frail but smiling monarch. However, a closer look at her right hand reveals dark bruising, often associated with intensive intravenous treatment. The palace described her condition as mobility issues, but behind closed doors, some reports suggest that a critical medical emergency had already been declared. By the morning of September 7th, the atmosphere at Balmoral had shifted from a quiet retreat to something far more intense, a frantic fortress under pressure. Leaked internal memos from a high-level staffer suggest that the Queen's doctors had already informed King Charles, then Prince Charles, that the bridge was failing. Yet the public was told nothing. According to this narrative, this marked the beginning of what some describe as a carefully controlled information blackout. Why was the Privy Council meeting cancelled at the very last minute? The official explanation cited rest, but other claims suggest a far more serious medical reality. Reports indicate that Queen Elizabeth II had entered a state of semi-consciousness. Then came what many consider the most heartbreaking element of the situation: isolation. Despite the severity of her condition, there appeared to be a delay in informing key members of the royal family. While King Charles was already in Scotland, why were Prince William, Prince Andrew, Prince Edward, and Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, only notified hours later? Even more controversial is the treatment of Prince Harry. Some reports claim he was among the last to be informed, learning about his grandmother's condition through news alerts, much like the general public. There are also claims that efforts were made to keep the inner circle extremely limited during those final hours. Witnesses near the estate reported seeing an unmarked helicopter landing late at night, not a medical aircraft, but allegedly tied to private security. At around the same time, the Queen's personal communication device, described in some accounts as an encrypted system used for high-level intelligence contact, was reportedly removed from her private study by an unidentified individual not recognized as part of her regular staff. Questions remain about who this person was and why they were there. Another point of concern raised in these accounts involves Angela Kelly, one of the Queen's most trusted confidants, who was reportedly denied access to the room during a critical 3-hour window. As the sun rose on September 8, Balmoral was described as being under a complete digital lockdown. Staff were allegedly instructed to switch off their phones. The idea of the loneliness of the sovereign was no longer symbolic, it had become a reality. Surrounded by history, yet isolated from much of her own family, Queen Elizabeth II was at the center of what some describe as a tightly controlled transition. As state mechanisms moved into place, her personal legacy appeared to merge with a political shift. It was during this period of isolation that reports of a mysterious purple folder began to surface. According to those claims, it contained instructions so sensitive that they needed to be carried out before the public announcement of her death. What was inside that folder? Was it a final attempt at uniting the family, or a set of directives that King Charles had to acknowledge before ascending the throne? The silence from the palace regarding this specific window of time remains notable. And as attention turns to the medical details, further questions arise. If Queen Elizabeth II officially passed away at 3:10 p.m., as stated on the death certificate, why does the timeline of events surrounding the announcement seem inconsistent? Why didn't the flight carrying the princes land until 3:50 p.m.? And why did a French news agency report her death nearly 2 hours before the BBC? The timeline isn't just confusing, it appears inconsistent. On September 29, 2022, the Registrar General for Scotland released the official document intended to provide closure to a grieving nation. Instead, it sparked intense debate among forensic analysts and royal observers. The official cause of death for Queen Elizabeth II, Elizabeth Alexandra Mary Windsor, was listed as a single clinical term, old age. In modern medical and legal contexts, that phrase carries significant implications. Under UK guidelines, old age is typically used only when a patient has experienced a prolonged decline without any identifiable disease directly responsible for death. However, questions arise when comparing this with the timeline. Just 48 hours earlier, Queen Elizabeth II was seen standing, smiling, and carrying out one of her most important constitutional duties. Critics argue that such a sudden shift raises legitimate concerns about whether old age fully explains the circumstances. Medical experts often note that death within such a short window is more commonly linked to specific conditions, such as organ failure or stroke, rather than age alone. Now consider the timeline more closely. The death certificate records the time of death as 3:10 p.m. Yet the royal flight carrying Prince William, Prince Andrew, and Prince Edward did not depart from RAF Northolt until 2:39 p.m. Why were senior members of the royal family still on the ground in London if the situation was already critical? Even more striking is the delay in the public announcement. The official statement confirming the Queen's passing was not released until 6:30 p.m. For over 3 hours, the public was informed only that she was under medical supervision, while, according to the official record, she had already passed away. What happened during those 200 minutes of silence? This gap has fueled numerous theories. Some palace insiders and commentators, including Giles Brandreth, a known associate of Prince Philip, have suggested that the Queen may have been suffering from a more serious underlying illness. One widely discussed claim points to multiple myeloma, a type of bone marrow cancer. Supporters of this theory argue that it could explain visible symptoms such as bruising on her hands, noticeable weight loss, and the increasing mobility issues observed in her final months. If such a diagnosis were accurate, critics argue that listing old age alone on the death certificate may not tell the full story. If true, this wouldn't just be a simplification. It would be seen by critics as a deliberate effort to preserve the image of an enduring, unshakable monarchy. Why would such a narrative be maintained? Some argue that publicly acknowledging a terminal illness months in advance could have triggered Operation London Bridge prematurely, potentially creating a constitutional challenge during an already turbulent political period in the United Kingdom. But there's another detail that raises further questions. Dr. Douglas Glass, the Queen's official apothecary in Scotland, was the one who signed the death certificate. However, according to various reports, local pharmacy records and Balmoral gate logs indicated that a specialist medical team from a private London clinic arrived at the estate around 11 a.m. that same day. These individuals were not described as standard palliative care providers. Instead, they were reportedly experts in hematology. If Queen Elizabeth II was simply nearing the end due to old age, Why would such highly specialized professionals be called in during her final hours? And then the situation becomes even more unusual. In the United Kingdom, wills are generally part of the public record after death. However, royal wills are sealed and kept confidential, often for decades. Despite this, some sources claim that on the morning of September 8th, a legal document was urgently transported from London to Balmoral by private courier. This was not described as a routine update. It was allegedly an emergency codicil, a last-minute amendment. According to speculation, it contained final instructions concerning Prince Harry, the Duke of Sussex, as well as the redistribution of private funds from the Duchy of Lancaster. Some accounts even suggest that Queen Elizabeth II initially refused to sign the document until she was granted a private, unmonitored phone call with an individual whose identity has been redacted from official records. Was this her final personal decision? Perhaps even a quiet act of defiance against the institution often referred to as the firm? As the narrative unfolds, attention shifts to the internal workings of Operation London Bridge itself. What was designed to be the most carefully coordinated state transition in modern history reportedly encountered unexpected complications behind closed doors. Inside Balmoral on the afternoon of September 8th, the atmosphere was described as tense and controlled. While the public witnessed a smooth and dignified transfer of power, some accounts portray a very different reality unfolding in private. This wasn't just about ceremonial planning, it was a moment of internal pressure. A complex dynamic reportedly emerged between King Charles and Prince William, as tradition met transition, and long-standing royal protocols faced the realities of a new era. According to these claims, what followed was not only a logistical challenge but also a subtle power struggle, one that threatened to disrupt even the most meticulously prepared plans before they could fully unfold. Picture the corridors of Balmoral Castle. Usually silent and regal, they were now filled with the sharp echo of hurried footsteps and the low, tense murmur of men in dark suits. King Charles was reportedly pacing the drawing room, his face tight with tension, clutching a mobile phone, an unusual breach of royal protocol. Nearby, Prince William stood by the window, staring out into the mist, his jaw set in cold silence. The first major disruption came with the arrival of the family. The public narrative suggested unity, a family rushing to be by the Queen's side. But behind the scenes, the atmosphere was far from harmonious. At the center of this tension was a reported disagreement involving Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex. Sources claimed that King Charles told Prince Harry over a strained phone call that she was not to come to Balmoral during the Queen's final hours. According to these accounts, that decision contributed to a delay of nearly 200 minutes in the royal flight's departure. A deeply personal conflict, it is said, intersected with a moment of historic transition. But perhaps the most troubling complication involved the official notification process. Under the established protocol known as Operation London Bridge, the Prime Minister is meant to be the first to receive confirmation of the monarch's passing, delivered through the coded phrase "London Bridge is down." However, reports suggest that due to a secure line failure, or possibly an early leak, several senior officials across the Commonwealth were alerted before the Prime Minister was formally informed. This triggered an urgent effort to contain and manage the flow of information. According to some claims, the Queen's private secretary discovered that a key legal document, relating to the transfer of certain titles, had not yet been fully signed. Crucially, this document was required to be completed while Queen Elizabeth II was still conscious. This raises a serious question. If later reports indicating that she had lost consciousness are accurate, then who finalized the necessary paperwork that afternoon? Some analysts have pointed to irregularities in the signatures on documents dated September 8th. One appears consistent, while others have been described as noticeably different, fueling speculation about their authenticity. As the evening unfolded, tensions reportedly extended beyond administrative matters. Disagreements arose between Scottish authorities and royal medical officials regarding the handling and movement of the Queen's body. Because she passed away in Scotland, the protocol known as Operation Unicorn came into effect, overlapping with Operation London Bridge. The interaction between these two procedures reportedly created confusion and delays. For a brief period, it is claimed that the exact location of the Queen's remains was known only to a very limited group, an unusual and sensitive situation given the global significance of the moment. Then came the vigil of the heirs. Traditionally, the sovereign's children stand guard. But behind closed doors, the atmosphere was described as deeply strained. Reports suggest that Prince William favored a more modern approach to the transition, while King Charles insisted on adhering strictly to long-established traditions, including the formal mourning period rooted in historic precedent. Staff reportedly described the environment as suffocating, where genuine grief coexisted with the pressure of a sudden power shift. Yet perhaps the most unsettling claim surrounds the Queen's iconic red box. Each day, it contained sensitive state documents delivered to the monarch. On the morning of her death, it was reportedly delivered as usual. But by that evening, when it was retrieved, the lock had allegedly been forced open. This suggests that someone may have accessed the Queen's private correspondence with world leaders before King Charles formally assumed control. Who had access, and what were they searching for? As the story continues, attention turns to the question of inheritance. Vast wealth, hidden arrangements, and a will that remains sealed from public view. A story never meant to be spoken in the same breath as democracy. The British monarchy is often described as a gilded cage. But by the evening of September 8th, some narratives suggest it looked more like a global financial empire crowned with tradition. As Queen Elizabeth II's condition worsened, attention, according to various claims, shifted beyond Balmoral to a complex network of offshore financial centres, including Jersey, the Isle of Man, and the Cayman Islands. This is often referred to as the sovereign's shadow wealth, a concept debated by analysts and investigators alike. Officially, the Queen's private fortune was estimated at around $500 million. However, investigative reporting over the years has pointed to a far more intricate financial structure. This includes nominee companies and legal entities such as Bank of England Nominees Limited, which have historically been used to hold shares on behalf of undisclosed owners. For decades, Queen Elizabeth II was granted certain legal exemptions that allowed her private investments to remain confidential. These reportedly included holdings in blue-chip stocks, racehorses, and vast tracts of land, some with origins stretching back centuries. But the most sensitive issue arises when distinguishing between royal institutions and private wealth, particularly the difference between the Crown Estate and the Duchy of Lancaster. The Crown Estate is not the monarch's personal property. It belongs to the institution. In contrast, the Duchy of Lancaster is considered the sovereign's private estate. Upon her death, this portfolio, valued at hundreds of millions, passed directly to King Charles. Under normal circumstances, such a transfer would be subject to inheritance tax. However, an agreement made in 1993 during the tenure of John Major established that assets passed from one sovereign to another are exempt, in order to preserve the continuity of the monarchy. As a result, King Charles inherited these assets without the standard taxation applied to private citizens, an arrangement that has often been debated, especially during times of economic difficulty in the UK. There are also claims surrounding unusual legal activity in the Queen's final hours. Reports suggest that her private secretary, Sir Edward Young, was seen leaving her room carrying sensitive documents under heightened security. While unverified, such accounts have fueled speculation about last-minute legal or financial decisions. Additionally, access to certain royal financial archives, particularly records dating back to 1977, the year of the Silver Jubilee, was reportedly restricted shortly before her passing, raising further questions among observers. Now, attention turns to one of the most guarded aspects of royal life, the will. In the United Kingdom, most wills become public documents after death. However, royal wills are sealed under a long-standing legal tradition, often for decades. Since the early 20th century, this practice has ensured that the personal estates of senior royals remain private. Despite this, speculation persists. Some reports suggest that Queen Elizabeth II's will may have included controversial provisions. Among these are claims that she intended to return certain pieces from her private jewelry collection, particularly items with historical or colonial significance, to their countries of origin. If true, such a move would have carried deep symbolic weight, potentially signaling a shift in how the monarchy addresses its historical legacy. However, according to some accounts, both King Charles and Prince William viewed this possibility with concern, fearing it could set a precedent that might gradually dismantle parts of the royal collection. This alleged disagreement is said to have contributed to tense discussions within Balmoral, conversations that were not only about loss, but also about the future direction of the monarchy. Another controversial claim centers on a supposed golden codicil, a final amendment to the will. Some sources suggest that Queen Elizabeth II intended to allocate a significant private trust in a way that bypassed traditional lines of succession. If accurate, such a decision would have had profound implications, not just for the royal family, but for the structure of royal inheritance itself. Princess Anne, widely regarded as one of the hardest-working members of the royal family, is often mentioned in discussions about loyalty and duty within the institution. Some claims also reference a protective financial arrangement intended for Prince Harry's children, Archie and Lilibet, suggesting certain assets may be structured in ways that limit direct control by King Charles. As the sun set over the Highlands, the briefcase reportedly carried by the royal lawyer disappeared into a waiting limousine. When the will was eventually secured in a private vault in London, questions arose among observers. Was the document the same one originally signed by Queen Elizabeth II, or had adjustments been made to ensure continuity and control within the monarchy? If the financial aspects seem complex, attention then shifts to another area of intrigue: communications stored within the Queen's iconic red box. As the narrative continues into its next phase, it explores alleged spiritual or symbolic messages and private correspondence said to have been left for King Charles, including warnings that some interpret as concerns about the long-term stability of the House of Windsor. In the final moments of Queen Elizabeth II's life at Balmoral, an atmosphere of quiet stillness reportedly settled over the estate, described by some not merely as a medical conclusion, but as the end of a significant historical era. For decades, it has been suggested in certain circles that the Queen held a strong interest in the continuity of her lineage, not only through political means, but also through historical, philosophical, and even symbolic perspectives on monarchy and legacy. To understand the emotional and symbolic weight placed upon King Charles, some narratives look back centuries, referencing historical writings and interpretations associated with figures like Nostradamus, a 16th-century writer known for cryptic verses that some believe can be loosely connected to modern events. One such quatrain is often interpreted, by its supporters rather than established historians, as describing a reluctant successor who was not initially expected to rule. These interpretations are not universally accepted and are widely considered speculative. Against this backdrop, King Charles, who waited decades before ascending the throne, stepped into his role carrying both historical expectation and public scrutiny. For some observers, this transition was not only administrative but also symbolic, representing continuity after a long reign. Inside the palace, attention is said to have turned to the Queen's private study in the hours following her passing. The room, described as quiet and dim, reportedly still contained the famous red box used for state documents. Within it, alongside official materials and correspondence, were said to be several handwritten envelopes addressed to King Charles. According to these accounts, such envelopes are typically reserved for highly sensitive guidance intended for the sovereign's successor. While the contents remain private and unverified, speculation has surrounded their purpose. Some claims suggest they contained guidance on managing the institution's relationships, internal structure, and public role in the years ahead. One commonly discussed topic involves how Prince Harry and the Sussex branch of the family would be positioned within the broader framework of the monarchy. Another centers on how the institution might adapt its public image and internal operations in a rapidly changing world. A third area of speculation involves long-term strategic concerns about the future of the monarchy itself, including how to preserve stability amid political, social, and economic change. Some interpretations frame these ideas as symbolic rather than literal, more reflective of institutional planning than secret directives. Amid all this, a broader question emerges. How should a centuries-old institution evolve while maintaining continuity? As discussions continue, some observers have noted that King Charles has shown a preference for a more streamlined approach to royal life, including spending time in residences outside of Buckingham Palace. Others see this as a practical choice aligned with modernization rather than any deeper implication. Ultimately, interpretations vary widely, and many of the more dramatic claims remain speculative rather than verified. What remains clear is that the transition from Queen Elizabeth II to King Charles marked one of the most significant moments in modern royal history, an event that continues to be examined, analysed, and discussed from multiple perspectives. Some suggest that King Charles has spent more time at Clarence House, a residence that offers a quieter and more insulated environment. According to these interpretations, this preference may reflect a desire for stability rather than symbolism. Others speculate that the long reign of Queen Elizabeth II has left a lasting institutional presence that any successor would naturally take time to fully step into. In certain narratives, references are made to what is described as an ancient curse tied to royal symbolism and regalia. These claims often center around the idea that certain historical artifacts carry superstition rather than verified historical fact. Observers note that during the coronation of Queen Camilla, specific traditional elements, such as certain historical gems, were not included. While some interpret this as symbolic caution, others view it simply as a matter of modernizing ceremonial practices and avoiding controversy. Overall, King Charles has been described by commentators as adopting a more measured and cautious approach to his role, shaped by decades of waiting and preparation rather than sudden accession. There are also anecdotal claims about private conversations between King Charles and Prince William during the early stages of the transition. However, such reports remain unverified and are often based on second-hand accounts. As attention turns to the broader transition, some narratives revisit the idea of a golden box said to contain important state documents. Officially, items associated with the monarchy's ceremonies, such as the imperial state crown, orb, and scepter, represent continuity and tradition rather than hidden mechanisms of power. Their removal from the coffin during the funeral symbolized the formal end of one reign and the beginning of another. The funeral at St. George's Chapel marked the conclusion of an era. What the world witnessed was a carefully structured ceremonial process reflecting centuries of tradition, not a hidden transfer of secret authority. Claims that a golden box contained a legal mechanism affecting succession are not supported by established constitutional records. The line of succession in the United Kingdom is governed by clear laws, including parliamentary statutes such as the Act of Settlement and subsequent amendments. Speculation that Queen Elizabeth II left behind instructions for a future abdication in favour of Prince William is not confirmed by credible historical or constitutional sources. In practice, abdication in the modern British monarchy is an exceptionally rare and personal decision, as seen historically with King Edward VIII. What is well established, however, is the legacy of Queen Elizabeth II, a reign defined by continuity, stability, and adaptation across decades of social and political change. Her passing marked the end of a historic chapter and the beginning of a new one under King Charles III. As with many major historical events, interpretations and narratives continue to circulate. But the officially recognized framework of the monarchy remains grounded in constitutional law, public ceremonies, and established tradition. Ultimately, the transition did not end at the funeral. It marked the continuation of an institution that evolves over time while maintaining its core structure.